I declined my neighbor's request to build a gate between our yards. The next week, my dog was poisoned, my car was egged, and my trash was set on fire. The police dismissed it as coincidence. Then I found a trail of breadcrumb shit led me directly to his shed. Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tales, where loyalty dies, lies bleed out, and the truth hits like a slap to the face. These aren't just stories, they're confessions soaked in betrayal and regret. Ever spotted a red flag when it was already too late? Say it in the comments. Let's tear into today's tale. I'm not the type to jump to conclusions. I've lived long enough to know that life throws curveballs. Not everything's a conspiracy. But what happened to me after I moved into my house in Denton, Texas, that wasn't random. That was personal. It started with a simple no. I moved in around May 2018, just me and my dog Roxy. She was 10 at the time. Old but loyal as ever. Big German Shepherd. Protective but sweet. We'd been through a lot together. Divorce, job changes, moving states. That house was supposed to be our fresh start. Next door lived Dave. Retired. Probably mid-60s. Looked like he used to be military or law enforcement. He introduced himself right away. Friendly enough though, something about him felt off. He talked. Like everything he said was a test. Like he was waiting for you to fail some invisible standard he had in his head. About a month after I settled in, Dave came to my front door holding a measuring tape and a can of beer. Said he wanted to build a guillotine, the back fence between our yards. Said it would be convenient for both of us, I asked. Convenient for what? He kind of shrugged and said, in case I ever need to stop by or we need to check each other's property. I didn't like the way he said that, like my yard was somehow his business. I told him no, politely but firmly. I just wasn't comfortable with that. He nodded slowly. What? But I could see it pissed him off. His smile tightened and he said, guess not everyone around here values trust. That was the last civil conversation we ever had. The first sign something was wrong came. 5 days later, I let Roxy out in the morning like I always did. She sniffed around, came back in, ate, and went to lay down an hour later. She started throwing up. I rushed her to the vet. After blood work and x-rays, they told me she had ingested rat poison. I swear, as my vision went red. I don't keep poison on my property. I never have. And Roxy's an old dog. She doesn't dig or chew anything she's not supposed to. The vet asked if she might have eaten something in the yard. That's when it hit. Someone had to have thrown it over the fence. She pulled through barely. Stayed up 3 nights in a row watching her breathe. My hands shook with rage, but I had no proof. 3 days later, my car was egged. Not just 1 or 2 eggs, a whole carton. Smashed and smeared across the windshield and driver's side door. Shells ground into the paint. Took me over an hour to clean it off, and it's still left. Marcus filed a report. Officers said it was probably teenagers, that they'd keep an eye out. The next night, my trash bins were set on fire. I woke up to the smell of burnt plastic. My neighbor across the street was banging on my door. Flames were crawling up the fence when I got out there with the hose. The bins had been doused in something flammable. The fire department came. So did the police. They said it was probably a prank. That was the 3rd coincidence. In less than 2 weeks, I asked if they could check with Dave. Maybe his cameras caught something. They said unless I had proof he was involved, they couldn't just go around accusing people. The cop even said you can't just assume because you had a disagreement. I realized I was alone in this, so I installed my own cameras, 1 in the front, 1 in the back. I spent more than I could afford, but I couldn't sleep at night knowing Sumion was targeting me, or worse, targeting Roxy again then. About a week later, I saw something odd. I was raking leaves near the back fence, just trying to clear my head. That's when I noticed a line of breadcrumbs scattered behind the shrubs. Not a huge pile, just a trail. Like someone had dropped them deliberately. I crouched down, followed it. It went along the fence, through a small opening I hadn't noticed before, right into Dave's yard. And it didn't stop at his door. It led directly to his shed, not the main house. It's the shed. In that shed it was locked tight, but the grass around it was flattened. The dirt showed something had been dragged there recently. I didn't need a court order to know something bad had happened there. I didn't call the police again. I already knew what they'd say. This wasn't about proving something in court anymore. This was personal, and I wasn't going to let it go. After finding that trail to Dave's shed, I didn't sleep right for days. Every creak in the house made me jump. Roxy stuck close to me, like she felt the tension too. I kept watching the cameras. Days passed. Nothing unusual. Dave came and went like always. Took his little walks, watered his lawn, waved to passing neighbors. That made it worse. That fake normal, like he hadn't nearly killed my dog, like he wasn't setting fires or destroying my car, but I didn't want to act on anger. Not yet. I needed something solid. So I started watching him. I adjusted my backyard camerado angle toward the fence gap. I moved my front porch cam to face more of his driveway, and then I waited. It took almost 2 weeks, but finally, something happened. At 2:43 a.m., my back camera caught movement. A figure, hooded, entered my yard through that same fence gap. He didn't come all the way to the house. He scattered something near the shrubs. It was fast. Maybe 30 seconds. Then he was gone. I checked it frame by frame. He never looked at the camera. But his build, his walk, I knew it was Dave. I knew that morning. Checked the area. More breadcrumbs. He was trying to lure something again, probably aiming to bring in another animal. Maybe hoping I'd think Roxy got into something by accident. I printed screenshots, time-stamped, clear enough to see the shape, not the face. I went to the police again. Showed them everything. They shrugged, said this could be anyone. It's not definitive. I asked, how many 60-some white guys with that limp lived directly next door to me? The cop told mindless I could get him on video doing something illegal. It wasn't enough to act. I felt like I was losing my mind, so I escalated. I bought a cheap trail cam and hid it in the shrubs, right where he dropped the breadcrumbs. I rigged a motion light in the back. I even started leaving small objects, marbles, bottle caps lined up along the fence gap, just to see if they got disturbed. Every morning, they were knocked over. But then, things got worse. First, started getting notes in my mailbox. No envelope, just folded pieces of paper, printed, not handwritten. The first one said, "You're not welcome here." The second, "Dogs die every day." I took those to the cops too. They told me it was probably kids messing around. Same old line. One night, caught Dave standing in his backyard. Asterisk, just standing, hands in his pockets, staring at my house. He didn't flinch when I stepped outside. Just gave me this long, blank look. Then he turned and went inside. That was the night I decided I'd had enough. His phone had saved the text from Dave. Eat was clear as dado. The breadcrumb drop again tonight some. Spatu's the bag from the shed, $100. Cash the bag from the shed theer. It wasa connexiona. Living witness proof Dave orchestrated the set up. Used his shed as the storage point. He asked Zach if he'd be willing to talk to police. He hesitates. Hey, he didn't want to get involved, but he'd do it if he could stay anonymous. Made copies of his messages. Documented everything. Then I reached out to a lawyer net for a lawsuit for protection. I needed to build a case so bulletproof cops couldn't shrug it off again while all that was in motion. I went back to watching Dave, but something about him changed. Started pacing more, spent longer in the backyard catch. Him peeking through his blinds during the day, and one night this is when I knew the tide had turned. I watched him drag a large black bag out of the shed and load it into his truck. Next morning, shed was empty, was cleaning up, new schwa new. I was on to Hyman, then came the final straw. We came home from work and found Roxy cowering in the hallway, shaking their locky no windows. Broken butt in the backyard, a raw steak, covered in blue, all green, crystals rat. Poisson this time. She didn't eat Edie, think she smelled it and stayed away, but the message was clear. Dave had been in my yard again, except now I had Kamrasi, had Texi, had a witness, and I had motival, but I didn't call the cops, not yet, Beck. I realized something, that Nietzsche had a chance to not just stop Dave, had a chance to ruin him's way he tried to ruin me on. I wasn't going to waste IT knew I couldn't go to the police just yet net until everything lined up. Dave had buried himself. If I went to Erlithied, let him wriggle out a gainy. Needed to trap him in his own game with no escapeso. I started baiting him back. He stopped raking the leaves by the fence lit. The area get overgrown. Againi moved the trail cam slightly closer to his yard and mounted. Another one in a birdhousey, installed near the property line but left the obvious camera, one he probably already knew about. In plain sightin', I left Roxy with a friend out in Free Skoy. Told Dave she was recovering but I didn't mention she wasn't home anymore. Let him think she was still. There a mabe sick mabe vulnerable that. Wee Kai. Planted my own stake in the yard na, poison just. A raw slab I bought cheap at the grocery store, left it out overnight, near the same area where the last one had been desedshire. In Ottawa night's ladderth camera caught him full view this Tamino hoodna thing just Davis stepping through the gap in the fence like it belonged to him, rubber gloves on, tossing another piece of meat and crouching gaddisting. Something by the fence post didn't even look uppy had him backed up the video took. Screenshots on them to the lawyer, sent them to the kid, Zach. Replied right away thoughts. The same gloves he had when I met him, same hootie toey. Finally had evidence that connected DeVetto, both the poisoning, and trespassing on private property multiple times, but I wasn't finished. Next I walked over to the VFW bar where I knew he spent his Thursday afternoons. Didn't go eeny. Waited in the parking lot sitting in my truck with the dash cam recording. He came out, I got out, stood by my tailgating, just stared at him. Paused like he didn't know whether to nod or ignore Mathone. I said, "You dropped something in my yard again. Smile for the camera next time." He didn't say a word. His jaw locked, got in his truck and drove off, without even starting it properly, jerked. The transmission heart that neath his shed door was wide open. Next morning started burning things in. A fire pit, purse bags, a small blue plastic tub I'd seen behind the shed before, was panicking. That's when I pulled the trigger bot, not with the policinot. Yeti made anonymous dropscopies of the Fuda guest creature Sachs texts, a full timeline of events. He sent them to the HOA TO, the City Code Enforcement Officiado, the Denton Animal Control Office, and to a local investigative journalist, to ran a community podcast about small-town corruption and cover-up. Said podcast episode dropped 2 days later, titled "The Neighbor from Hell, a North Denton Nightmare." Didn't name me or Dave directly, but anyone on our street could connect the dots. Neighborhood explodettles started whispering. Dave got quiet, very quiet, didn't come outside for 3 days. But this story wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't just about neighbors knowing who he really was. This was about destroying him where it hurt, and that part was just about to begin too. Days after the podcast dropped, Ty got a call from a local animal control officer, wanted to follow up on the steak incident. Said the footage was pretty alarming. Gave him everything, genetted clips, trail cam card, original steak from the second poisoning attempt, sealed in a Ziploc in my freeze. Air told me straight, this is enough. We're opening a formal investigation. This time with police couldn't ignore high pressure from the HOA complaints. City code reports and the sudden media attention forced their hand. An officer came. Bit different from the ones I dealt with before this. One actually listened. He handed over everything, the breadcrumb trail. His photos, egging and trash fire reports, sack screenshots and number forged. HOA complaint documents Dave submitted to Frame May, had it all organized in a binder within a week. The executed a search warrant. Found poison multiple types stored in Tupperware containers. Found raw meat in his freezer in plastic bags. Brand and Cuttis. What? I pulled from my yard, found those same rubber gloves and a file folder in his desk drawer. Inside that folder printed notes about my schedule items I left for work when Roxy went outside, what days. I took the trash out, been tracking my stalking method, gave them enough to press charges: animal cruelty, trespasser, damage and stalking. Arrested him in front of his house at 7:32 Me watched from my kitchen window while sipping coffee. Didn't resist it and say a word, but the fallout didn't stop. Their story exploded. Podcast aired a follow-up episode, naming him directly as picture mugshit, and Allgoat posted online. VFW cut ties with him. The HOA held an emergency meeting, evanned him from any community events. Kids stopped riding bikes near his house. Neighbors stopped waving him. Lost everything the kicker Zach agreed to testify anonymously thought was enough to lock. In the timeline, Dave ended up taking a plea deal, 3 years probation, mandatory. Mental health evaluation, a hefty fine and a permanent ban from owning or handling animals but May wasn't Donay, filed a civil suit property damage emotional distress, vos camera. Equipment time off work Olgol, Fesmi lawyer was sharp new, the right langwag new. The system you settled out of court for, $47,000. He had to sell his truck and dip into retirement to pay ITUs that money to rebuild the Fensitaler strong gap sand. I added 2 more cameras on the roof Lineone hidden in the garage. Motion light Roxy's still here older, now slower but safe a walker every night past. Dave's house is still there hiding behind his curtains. Never comes out, never makes eye contact he don't need to wave he knows.